when LeBron James stepped into a small family restaurant on a rain-heavy Thursday night in Louisville, Kentucky. Nobody inside knew the story they were living through would later be retold as a lesson about dignity, not fame, not money, dignity. It was 8:17 p.m. on March 14th, and the restaurant was supposed to close in 43 minutes. The neon sign above the front window flickered every 9 seconds, buzzing softly against the dark glass. One letter had been out for almost a month, so what should have read, "Marion's table," now looked like Marion's T. Beale, as if even the building had lost something, and was too tired to explain what. Inside, 55-year-old Ruth Calloway stood behind the counter with a receipt book open in front of her, staring at numbers that refused to turn gentle. $3,960 in unpaid rent, $817 in the business checking account, $286 due to the gas company by Monday morning, and one envelope from Norton Children's Hospital folded inside her apron pocket, pressed against her hip like a stone. Her grandson Caleb was 10 years old. He had a heart condition with a name Ruth still hated saying out loud because the words made it feel bigger than him, bigger than his little blue backpack, bigger than his pencil drawings of race cars, bigger than the way he asked for extra honey on his biscuits and pretended not to be scared before every appointment. Ruth had spent the whole day smiling at customers. That was what people saw. They saw the woman who called everybody baby, who remembered who liked hot sauce and who couldn't eat onions, who slid extra cornbread into takeout bags when she knew someone was going home to an empty apartment. They did not see her wake up at 4:31 a.m., with her hand already searching the empty side of the bed where her husband Samuel used to sleep. They did not see her sitting at the kitchen table before sunrise, wearing his old gray cardigan, counting bills under the yellow light, with tears sitting behind her eyes, but not falling. They did not see her whisper, "Lord, not today," every time the walk-in cooler made that rattling sound from the back wall. The restaurant smelled like fried catfish, pepper gravy, lemon cleaner, and old wood that had absorbed 20 years of conversations. A small radio near the coffee machine played a gospel station low enough that the words were more memory than music. Rain tapped against the windows in thin, nervous lines. Only 3 tables were occupied. At table 2, a retired bus driver named Harold Price ate chicken and dumplings with both elbows on the table, the way Ruth's late husband used to tell him not to. At table 5, 2 nurses from the night shift at Baptist Health were eating quickly, still wearing scrubs, their badges turned backward against their chests. At table 8, a young father in a paint-stained hoodie sat with his little girl, who was slowly pushing green beans around her plate, like they had personally offended her. It was an ordinary room. Then the front door opened. Cold rain breathed in first. The bell above the door gave one tired ring, and a tall man in a black hoodie and dark jeans ducked slightly under the frame, shook rain from his shoulders, and stepped onto the worn tile floor. For half a second, nobody moved. The young father looked up from his daughter's plate. One nurse froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Harold Price lowered his glass of sweet tea, so slowly it seemed the whole room was waiting for the ice to settle. The man pulled back his hood. LeBron James stood just inside Marion's table, rain beating on the brim of his black cap, his face calm, his eyes carrying that particular tiredness of someone who has spent too many years being watched by strangers. Ruth blinked once, then again, because the mind does not always accept impossible things right away. LeBron looked around the restaurant without hurry, not like a man measuring whether the place deserved him, more like a man remembering the kind of places that had held families together before the world became too fast to notice them. His eyes paused on the photographs along the wall. A Little League team from 2009. Samuel Calloway standing beside Ruth on opening day, both of them younger, laughing, and holding up a giant pair of scissors in front of a red ribbon. A faded photo of Ruth's mother in a church hat. standing beside a stove with one hand on her hip and the other pointing at somebody outside the frame. LeBron removed his cap. "Evening, Mom," he said. His voice was low and steady, familiar from interviews, commercials, speeches. But in a tiny restaurant without lights or microphones, it sounded smaller, warmer, like a person speaking to another person. Ruth found her voice somewhere beneath the shock. "Evening, baby." Then she caught herself. Her hand flew to her chest. "I'm sorry. I call everybody baby." LeBron smiled gently. "That's all right. I've been called worse." The room released a small breath. Not laughter exactly, something softer. Relief. Ruth straightened her apron with both hands. "Kitchen's still open if you're hungry." "I am," he said, looking up at the chalkboard menu. "What do you recommend?" Harold Price muttered from table 2. "Catfish." The young father added, "Meatloaf." One of the nurses said, "The peach cobbler, if she hasn't run out." Ruth turned toward them. "Y'all let the man read." But there was a smile in her voice now. LeBron studied the menu. His face changed when he saw the special smothered turkey wings, rice and gravy, macaroni and cheese, collard greens, cornbread. He looked back at Ruth. "You still got turkey wings? I've got 2 left. I'll take one. You want both?" He shook his head. "Save one for somebody who needs it." That was the first thing Ruth noticed about him. Not his height, not the shoulders, not the fame, the restraint. Famous people often filled a room by accident. Some filled it on purpose. LeBron seemed to do the opposite. He kept trying to make himself smaller so other people could keep breathing normally. He chose the booth in the back corner, the one beneath the old framed photograph of the Ohio River at sunrise. His back faced the wall. His eyes faced the room. People who had lived long enough to be recognized in public often sat that way. Ruth plated the food herself, not because he was LeBron James. At least that was what she told herself. She chose the better turkey wing, the one that had stayed whole in the pan, the one with gravy clinging to it like velvet. She spooned rice beneath it, added collards dark and glossy from hours of slow cooking, and put a square of cornbread on the side, wrapped in a white napkin. When she carried the plate to him, he looked at it before touching anything. Just looked, as if respect could begin before eating. "Thank you," he said. 2 simple words. But he said them like they belonged to her. Ruth nodded and went back behind the counter, pretending to wipe a spot that was already clean. She watched him through the small mirror near the coffee machine. Samuel had installed that mirror the first week they opened. "A restaurant owner needs to see everything," he had said. "Not to catch people doing wrong. To notice when somebody needs something." LeBron took his first bite. Then he stopped. He did not close his eyes dramatically. He did not say anything loud. He simply became still in the way people become still when food reaches something deeper than hunger. Ruth knew that stillness. She had seen it in men who missed their mothers, in women who had not eaten a real meal all week, in widowers who came in on anniversaries and ordered what their wives used to love. Food could do that. It could walk into rooms words could not enter. LeBron took another bite, slower this time. Then another. He broke the cornbread with his hands instead of using a fork, and that small act nearly undid Ruth, for reasons she could not explain. People who broke cornbread with their hands had been taught by somebody, usually somebody who loved them. The nurses whispered to each other, but did not take a picture. Harold Price stared openly, because Harold had reached the age where pretending felt unnecessary. The little girl at table 8 leaned toward her father and whispered, "Is he a giant?" Her father whispered back, "Kind of." LeBron heard it, his mouth curved slightly. But he kept eating. At 8:36 p.m., Ruth's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Martin Bell, the landlord. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. She let it ring twice, then 3 times. Then she stepped into the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the storage room, where the walls did not reach the ceiling and privacy was more wish than fact. "Martin," she said, keeping her voice low. The restaurant continued around her. Forks against plates, rain against glass, the hum of the drink cooler near the register. But LeBron's hand slowed over his plate. He did not turn his head. He just stopped eating. "I hate calling this late," Martin Bell said, and Ruth could hear from the first sentence that nothing kind was coming without conditions. "But I need to know whether you'll have the full balance by Monday." Ruth closed her eyes. "I'm working on it." "I know you are. I've got the church luncheon Saturday. 60 plates. That should help." Ruth, just her name. That was all, and somehow it carried the whole problem. She leaned her shoulder against the wall, staring at a shelf of paper towels. Samuel had built himself with uneven screws and too much confidence. "I need until the end of the month." There was a pause. "Ruth, I gave you January, then February. I know, I've got a buyer asking about the property." Her breath caught. "What buyer?" "A dental group. They want to renovate the whole strip. They're offering cash." The hallway seemed to shrink around her. A dental group, where Samuel's photograph hung, where Caleb had learned to walk between tables holding sugar packets in both hands, where Ruth's mother's recipes lived in the steam and the walls and the stained pages of a notebook wrapped in a rubber band. A dental group. "I just need time," Ruth said. "I don't doubt that, but time doesn't pay my bank." She swallowed. Her voice wanted to break. She would not let it. Samuel used to tell her, "Fear can sit beside you, Ruthie. Just don't let it drive." So she held the wheel. "How much do you need Monday to keep the lease open?" "The full $3,960. I can get half. I need all of it." "Martin, I'm sorry." That word sat between them like something too heavy to lift. Behind her in the dining room, LeBron James set his fork down. Not loudly, not for attention, just down. Martin sighed. "If you bring me the full amount by noon Monday, we keep going. If not, I have to move forward. I don't want to, but I will." Ruth pressed her fingers against her eyes. "All right, I really am sorry." "I know." She ended the call and stood very still. There are silences that feel empty. This one did not. This one pressed against her ears, against her throat, against the old grief behind her ribs. She looked down at her apron pocket where the hospital envelope waited. Caleb's appointment, the copay, the specialist, the new test they wanted. She took one breath, then another. Then she did what working women have done forever. She fixed her face. When Ruth returned to the dining room, LeBron was looking at her. Not staring, looking. There is a difference. Staring takes something. Looking, when done with care, offers something. She moved behind the counter and picked up a towel. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. "We've got peach cobbler. Might be a little too sweet, depending on who you ask." He did not answer immediately. The restaurant seemed to sense it. Even the radio felt quieter. Then LeBron said, "Would you sit with me for a minute?" Ruth almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the idea was impossible. "I don't sit with customers. I understand." He waited. No pressure, no performance, just space. And somehow that space made her more willing to enter it. The nurses glanced down at their plates. The young father focused on his daughter's green beans. Harold Price folded his napkin with a seriousness that told everyone he had decided not to hear anything that came next. Ruth walked to the back booth and sat across from LeBron James. The booth creaked beneath the shift of the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, headlights moved across the wet parking lot and slid away. LeBron looked at the photograph above their table, the Ohio River gold with morning light. "You from here?" he asked. "Born across town, raised on the west side." He nodded. "This place yours?" "Mine and my husband's. Is he here tonight?" Ruth looked down at her hands. "No, Samuel passed 4 years ago." LeBron's face softened. "I'm sorry. People said that all the time. Most of them meant it enough for manners. He meant it differently, like he had allowed the sentence to land before sending it." "Thank you," Ruth said. He looked around the restaurant again, taking in the photographs, the worn floor, the handwritten dessert sign taped beside the register, the little glass jar labeled Caleb's College Fund. that held mostly coins and one folded $5 bill. What was his job here? LeBron asked. Ruth smiled before she could stop herself. Everything I didn't want to do. That made him smile too. He handled repairs, talked to vendors, carried the heavy boxes, burned the first batch of biscuits every Sunday morning because he insisted he knew better than me. LeBron leaned back slightly. Sounds like a good man. He was. The answer came quickly, then softer. He was. A small silence opened. Not awkward, honest. LeBron looked toward the counter where her receipt book still lay open. You're in trouble, he said. Not accusing, not pitying. Just naming the thing in the room so they would not have to pretend it was furniture. Ruth folded her hands. I didn't mean for you to hear that call. I know. This is not your concern. I know that too. Then why ask? He lowered his eyes to the table for a moment. There was a small nick in the wood, shaped almost like a crescent moon. Caleb had made it 2 summers earlier by banging a toy truck against the edge, while Ruth was too busy to stop him. LeBron touched the mark lightly with one finger, because I know what it looks like when somebody is holding up more than a building. Ruth did not speak. That sense found her too quickly. LeBron continued, carefully now. My mother held up rooms when I was a kid. Apartments we didn't own. Bills she couldn't pay yet. People's opinions, my feelings, her own fear. She held all of it, and most people only saw whether she smiled when they spoke to her. Ruth looked at him then. Really looked. Not at the athlete. Not at the famous man. At the sun inside him. That was when something changed it. Not dramatically. No music rose, no one gasped. But the air in the booth became different. Less like a stranger offering sympathy. More like 2 people recognizing a language. LeBron nodded toward her apron pocket. That hospital envelope for your grandson? Her hand moved to it automatically. She had forgotten it was visible. You caught that? I notice things. I see that. What's his name? Ruth hesitated, then answered. Caleb, how old? 10. What does he like? She almost said something general. Kids things, cars, drawing, cartoons. But LeBron waited like the details mattered. So Ruth gave him the real answer. He likes race cars, but only the old ones. Says new cars look too angry. He draws them with big, round headlights and flames on the side. He likes pancakes with honey instead of syrup. He reads the same book about Jackie Robinson over and over, even though the cover fell off last year. LeBron smiled at that. What team does he like? Ruth gave him a look. You asking basketball? I am. He says he likes whoever wins. LeBron laughed quietly. Smart kid. He is. Her smile faded. He's scared, though. He tries not to show it. They do that. You have kids. You know. The moment she said it, she worried she had spoken too familiarly. But LeBron did not seem offended. He nodded, eyes lowering briefly. Yeah, he said. I know. And this is where the story begins to turn. Though nobody in that restaurant understood it yet. Not the nurses. Not Harold. Not the father helping his daughter put on her small pink coat. Not Ruth. Maybe not even LeBron fully. Because sometimes a decision does not announce itself when it arrives. Sometimes it sits quietly inside a person until compassion gives it a name. Ruth told him about Caleb. Not everything at first, then more. She told him about the diagnosis, the appointments, the bills that arrived in language designed to confuse people who were already afraid. She told him about her daughter Lauren, working double shifts at a pharmacy warehouse in Jeffersonville and still showing up at the hospital with red eyes and a backpack full of clean socks. She told him about Caleb pretending to sleep whenever adults discussed money. She told him about Samuel, how he used to slip extra meatloaf to anyone who looked like payday had not come yet. How he believed a restaurant was not just a business. It's a table, Samuel used to say. And a table is where people remember they're human. LeBron listened. He did not check his phone, did not glance toward the door, did not interrupt with easy inspiration. He listened the way hungry people eat, with full attention. At 8:59 p.m. Holly quietly locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. Though she left the lights on, the nurses had gone. The young father had gone. Harold Price remained at table 2, reading the same newspaper page for 11 minutes. Not because he was reading it, but because he understood some moments require witnesses who know how to become furniture. When Ruth finished speaking, she seemed embarrassed by how much had left her. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at the table with her thumb, though there was nothing there. "I don't usually talk like this." "I know," LeBron said. Then he asked, "Can I see a picture of Caleb?" Ruth pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled just slightly. She found the picture from Caleb's 10th birthday. He sat at the restaurant counter with a paper crown slipping sideways on his head, holding up a drawing of a red race car with yellow flames. Behind him, the sign for Marion's table glowed fully lit, every letter working back then, Samuel's old Cardinals cap hanging on the wall beside the register. LeBron took the phone carefully. That mattered too. The way a person handles what you love tells you more than their promises. He studied the picture for a long time, long enough for Ruth to feel the back of her throat tighten. Then he handed it back with both hands. "He's got kind eyes," LeBron said. Ruth nodded once, because speaking would have cost too much. LeBron looked toward the old Cardinals cap on the wall. "Was that your husband's?" "Yes." "You keep it there every day?" "Every day." "Why?" Ruth looked at the cap. It was faded red now, almost pink at the seams. Samuel had worn it when they opened, when they painted the back hallway, when the fryer broke, when Caleb was born. On bed days, Ruth touched the brim before unlocking the door. He said no matter how hard things got, we should never let the room forget joy. LeBron sat with that. Then he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small black notebook. Not a phone, a notebook. The kind with a soft cover and a pen clipped to the side. He wrote something down. Ruth watched his hand move slowly across the page. "What are you writing?" "Something I don't want to forget." He tore out the page, folded it once, then twice, and placed it on the table between them. "Don't open this tonight." Ruth frowned. "What is it?" "A number." "Whose number?" "Someone who knows how to help families get through complicated medical doors." She stared at the folded paper. "I can't ask you for that." "You didn't." "I can't accept charity from a stranger." LeBron leaned forward slightly. His voice stayed gentle. "Then don't call it charity." "What should I call it?" "Respect." That word landed harder than money would have. Respect. Not rescue. Not pity. Respect. LeBron continued, "People hear help and think it means somebody is above somebody else. That's not what this is. Sometimes help is just somebody using the door they can reach to open one you've been knocking on too long." Ruth looked down. The paper sat between them. Small, white. Dangerous in the way hope can feel dangerous when disappointment has trained you well. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything tonight." He stood then, and the booth seemed to exhale. He walked to the register and paid for his meal in cash. He left a $100 bill beneath the water glass at his booth, folded once, not displayed. Then he stood in front of the wall of photographs. His eyes settled on Samuel's picture. Ruth watched him. He took in the smiling man in the Cardinals cap, one arm around Ruth's shoulder, both of them standing beneath a bright new sign and a sky full of early hope. LeBron turned back to her. "Your husband had good eyes," he said. Ruth pressed her lips together. "He did. He knew what he was building." "Yes. And he knew who could keep it standing." She looked away immediately. Too late. The words had already reached the part of her that had been tired for 4 years. LeBron did not push. He simply put his cap back on, pulled his hood up, and walked toward the door. Holly unlocked it for him with both hands. Before stepping outside, he paused and looked back at Ruth. "Call that number at 9 tomorrow morning." Then he opened the door. Rain and cold came in. The bell rang, and LeBron James stepped back into the night. For several seconds, nobody moved. Holly stood by the door. Harold lowered his newspaper. Ruth remained near the counter, holding the folded piece of notebook paper like it might disappear if she squeezed too hard. Finally, Harold spoke. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, That was something. Ruth almost laughed. Instead, she cried once. Just one sound. Then she covered her mouth. Holly crossed the restaurant and wrapped both arms around her, and Ruth let herself be held for exactly 7 seconds before pulling away and saying, "We still got dishes," because survival does not stop for miracles. Not even small ones. That night, Ruth drove home through wet streets with the folded paper inside the pocket of Samuel's old cardigan. She did not open it at red lights. She did not open it when she pulled into her driveway. She did not open it while standing in her kitchen beneath the humming ceiling light. She placed it on Samuel's side of the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at it. The house was quiet. Too quiet. After Samuel died, silence had become a second tenant. It occupied rooms, sat in chairs, waited beside her coffee cup in the morning. Ruth lay down fully dressed, one hand resting on the folded paper. She slept badly, but she slept. At 6:12 a.m., pale morning light touched the curtains. At 6:14, she opened the paper. There was a phone number written in clean, careful handwriting. Below it were 11 words. "Call at 9. Tell Michelle that Caleb deserves a real chance." That was all. No explanation, no signature, no promise, just a door. Ruth made coffee and did not drink it. At 8:57, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone in front of her. The table still had a burn mark near the center from the year Samuel tried to make bananas Foster for Valentine's Day and nearly set a dish towel on fire. Ruth touched the mark with one finger. At exactly 9, she dialed. A woman answered on the second ring. "Good morning. This is Michelle Donovan." Ruth sat straighter. "My name is Ruth Calloway. LeBron James gave me this number." There was no gasp, no confusion, just a warm breath. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm glad you called." Ruth closed her eyes. Michelle explained slowly. She worked with a family health access program connected to several pediatric specialists across the region. LeBron had called late the night before. He had explained only enough, not too much. Ruth appreciated that. He had not turned her pain into a story for someone else to consume. Michelle asked about Caleb, asked about the diagnosis, asked about appointments, insurance denials, transportation, prescriptions, school absences, questions Ruth had answered before, but never with someone who sounded like she intended to do something with the answers. By 9:42, Ruth was crying silently into a napkin. By 10:03, Michelle had scheduled Caleb for a review with a pediatric cardiologist in Cincinnati the following week. By 10:18, transportation was being arranged. By 10:27, Ruth learned the outstanding balance that had been haunting her daughter for months would be reviewed for assistance. By 10:31, Shell said, "Mrs. Calloway, I want you to hear me clearly. Your grandson is not being forgotten because paperwork is complicated." Ruth put her hand over her mouth. There are sentences that do more than inform. They return breath. But that was not the only thing that happened. At 11:46 a.m., a man in a navy raincoat walked into Marion's table carrying a sealed envelope. He asked for Ruth Calloway and would not leave it with anyone else. Ruth opened it in the kitchen. Inside was a cashier's check made out directly to Martin Bell for $3,960. The memo line read, "For keeping the table open." There was no name attached, only a small note. Not every bill is only about money. Ruth stood beside the prep sink for a long time. The fryer hissed behind her. Holly called her name twice from the front. Ruth could not answer. She was not thinking about being saved. That was not the feeling. She was thinking about all the times she had been treated like late payments meant late character. Like struggle was a personality flaw. Like needing time made her less worthy of being spoken to with patience. And here was a man who could have treated her like a charity case, but instead had seen the whole room she was trying to hold together. By Monday morning, Martin Bell had the check. He called Ruth at 12:09 p.m. His voice sounded different, not embarrassed exactly, more careful. "Ruth," he said, "I received payment." "Yes, I don't know what happened." I had a customer who respected the food. A pause. That must have been some food? It was. Martin cleared his throat. I'm still interested in working something out long-term, if you are. Ruth looked around the restaurant. At Samuel's cap, at the crooked dessert sign, at the empty tables waiting for lunch. I am, she said, but I need something in writing. Another pause. Then, to his credit, Martin said, fair enough. That was the first consequence. There were others. On Wednesday, Caleb and his mother Lauren traveled to Cincinnati for the appointment Michelle had arranged. The doctors spoke to Caleb, not just over him. That mattered. He showed Caleb diagrams, explained the condition with patience, asked about race cars and laughed when Caleb said most new cars looked mean in the headlights. The treatment plan changed, not magically. Real life rarely changes in one dramatic motion. But it changed. More support, better coordination, less confusion, a path. And sometimes a path is the difference between despair and endurance. That Friday evening, Marion's table filled earlier than usual. Ruth assumed it was because of the rain. Then Holly came rushing from the front with her phone in one hand. You need to see this. Ruth wiped flour from her fingers. I'm busy. No. You need to see this. It was a post, not from LeBron's main account, from a local youth program in Cleveland that had shared a short video of LeBron speaking to a group of teenagers about respect. He stood in a gym wearing a black hoodie, hands folded in front of him, voice calm. Someone had asked him what leadership meant. He had not mentioned Ruth by name. He had not mentioned Marion's table. He had not turned her restaurant into content. He simply said, leadership is noticing who keeps showing up when nobody is clapping. It's respecting the people who feed communities, clean rooms, drive buses, raise kids, and hold families together without asking for a spotlight. Don't wait until somebody is famous to treat them like they matter. That clip spread, slowly at first, then faster. By Saturday morning, someone had connected the dots. A delivery driver had seen LeBron at Marion's table. A nurse had told her cousin. Harold Price, despite insisting he minded his business, had apparently told 3 people at the barbershop with enough detail to make the story grow legs. By noon, cars filled the parking lot. Not wild crowds. Not chaos. Just people. Families, teachers, mechanics. Firefighters wear station pants. A grandmother who said she drove 22 minutes because any place good enough for that man to sit quietly in the corner must be worth finding. Ruth ran out of turkey wings at 1:35, mac and cheese at 2:10, cornbread at 2:42. At 3:05, she stood in the kitchen staring at an empty pan and laughing so hard she had to sit down on a bucket of flour. Holly leaned against the cooler door, crying. This is insane, she said. No, Ruth said, wiping her face. This is a lot, and it was. A lot of work, a lot of orders, a lot of strangers asking questions Ruth did not want to answer, so she made a decision. She taped a handwritten note to the front door. This is a fictional-style community story now being shared because people believe in kindness. Please eat if you're hungry, tip the staff, and remember, everyone you meet is carrying something. Some customers read it and nodded. Some took pictures anyway. But the tone changed. People lowered their voices. They treated the room less like a spectacle and more like a place with history inside it. That was Ruth's doing. She had accepted help. She had not surrendered ownership of her dignity. Weeks passed. The sign was fixed first. Every letter bright. Marion's table. The name had belonged to Ruth's mother, Marion Wells, the woman in the church hat photograph. The woman who taught Ruth that seasoning was not measured only in spoons, but in attention. A local electrician refused payment for the sign repair and accepted only peach cobbler. The walk-in cooler was next. A repairman named Dennis came by after hearing the story from his sister. He replaced a motor, tightened a belt, and told Ruth, this thing got another 5 years if you stop threatening it. I don't threaten it. Holly coughed. Ruth ignored her. Caleb improved slowly. He still had bad days. Real children do. There were appointments, tired mornings, medication changes, and one afternoon when he threw his sketchbook across the room because he was sick of adults telling him to be brave. Lauren cried in the parking garage after that. Ruth held her. Then Caleb apologized before bedtime and drew a race car with wings on the side. On April 22nd, a package arrived at the restaurant. No return address Ruth recognized. Inside was a black notebook, soft cover, a pen clipped to the side. On the first page, written in familiar, careful handwriting, were these words: "For the things you don't want to forget." Ruth sat at the back booth holding that notebook for almost 10 minutes. Then she wrote the first entry. Samuel's cap still hangs straight when everything else feels crooked. The notebook became the symbol of the season that followed. She wrote down small things. Caleb eating half a biscuit after a heart appointment. Holly singing off-key while mopping. Harold Price leaving a $5 tip instead of $2 and pretending it was an accident. Lauren sleeping with her head on the restaurant office desk because exhaustion had finally caught her. A stranger paying for the young father and his daughter at table 8. Martin Bell signing a revised lease with fairer terms. The room remembering joy. Then came the day LeBron returned. No security, no cameras, no security line. Just a black SUV pulling into the lot at 7:26 p.m. on a warm evening in May, when the sky over Louisville had turned the color of peach syrup and the air smelled like cut grass and rain not yet fallen. Ruth saw him through the window before anyone else did. For 1 second, she did not move. Then she wiped her hands on her apron and touched Samuel's cap on the wall. LeBron entered the same way as before, carefully, as if the room mattered. This time, the restaurant recognized him with a silence that was not shock. It was welcome trying to behave. Harold Price smiled into his iced tea. Holly froze again, proving some things do not change. Caleb sat at the counter drawing in his sketchbook. He looked up, saw LeBron, and immediately dropped his pencil. It rolled off the counter and hit the floor. LeBron picked it up. "You Caleb?" Caleb nodded, eyes wide. "I heard you draw cars that don't look angry." Caleb stared at him, then said, very seriously, "Most headlights today have attitude problems." LeBron laughed, a real laugh. The whole room warmed. Ruth watched from behind the counter with her hand pressed flat against her apron pocket, where the black notebook now lived during every shift. LeBron ordered the turkey wings again. This time, Ruth gave him both. He raised an eyebrow. "I thought we were saving one for somebody who needs it." "You came back," Ruth said. "That counts." He accepted that. He sat at the back booth, but not alone for long. Caleb approached with his sketchbook held against his chest. "My grandma said not to bother you. She's smart." Caleb stopped. LeBron smiled. "But you're not bothering me." Caleb slid into the booth across from him like he had been invited to a board meeting. Ruth pretended not to listen. Everyone pretended not to listen. Everyone listened. Caleb showed him the drawing. A red car with round headlights, yellow flames, and a small crown painted on the hood. "This one's fast," Caleb said. "How fast?" "Fast enough to get away from bills." The room went quiet in a way that made Ruth's chest tighten. Children say things adults spend years hiding. LeBron looked at the drawing, then at Caleb. "Bills are slow," he said. "They feel fast when they're chasing you, but they're slow." Caleb considered this. "What's faster?" "People who love you." Caleb did not smile immediately. He looked down at the drawing as if storing the answer somewhere important. Then he said, "My grandpa used to say this place was a table." LeBron glanced toward Ruth. He was right. "My grandma cries in the freezer sometimes." Ruth closed her eyes. Holly looked down. Harold stopped stirring his tea. LeBron did not look embarrassed for Caleb. He did not rush to smooth the moment over. He simply nodded slowly. "Sometimes grown-ups cry where they think love can't hear them." Caleb looked up. "But it does? Always." That was the moment Ruth turned away, not because she was ashamed, because some sentences are too tender to let other people see what they do to your face. Later that evening, after the dinner rush softened, LeBron stood near the wall of photographs again. He looked at the new one Ruth had added. Caleb at his appointment in Cincinnati, holding a toy race car. Ruth approached with a slice of lemon pound cake wrapped in foil. "For the road," she said. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He accepted it. Then he saw the black notebook sticking out of her apron pocket. "You using it? Every day. What do you write?" "Things I don't want grief to steal." LeBron looked at her for a long moment. "That's good." Ruth swallowed. "There's something I never thanked you for properly." "You thanked me." "No, not that." She looked toward Samuel's cap. "The night you came in, you said Samuel knew who could keep this place standing." LeBron's expression became still. "I meant it. I didn't know I needed someone to say that." He nodded once. "My mom used to say people can survive a lot when they feel seen." Ruth breathed in slowly. "That's what this was really about, wasn't it?" "What?" "You didn't just help us." He waited. "You saw us." The restaurant around them continued softly. Forks, low voices, the drink cooler humming. Caleb laughing at something Holly said. LeBron looked around the room as if making sure the answer belonged to all of it. Then he said, "Everybody deserves that before they're in trouble." That line stayed with Ruth longer than the check, longer than the medical calls, longer than the social media attention. Everybody deserves that before they're in trouble. 3 months later, Marion's Table hosted a community dinner on a Sunday afternoon. Not a fundraiser. Ruth refused that word. She called it the open table. No tickets, no speeches. People paid what they could. Some paid nothing. Some paid for 4 families behind them. Teachers came, nurses came, truck drivers, students' widows, tired mothers, teenage boys pretending not to enjoy the peach cobbler, and one landlord named Martin Bell who washed dishes for 2 hours without being asked. On the wall near the register, Ruth hung a small framed note. Not the cashier's check, not a photo of LeBron, the note from the first envelope. Not every bill is only about money. Below it, she placed a handwritten line of her own. Not every table is only about food. Caleb designed the flyer. He drew a long table stretching down the middle of a street. Around it sat people of every kind, all with round headlights above their heads like halos, because, as he explained, everybody should look less angry. At 4:18 p.m., as sunlight poured through the clean front windows, Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway watching the room fill itself with noise. Good noise. Human noise. The sound of people becoming less alone over plates of food. Samuel's cap hung straight on the wall. The repaired sign glowed outside. The black notebook rested beside the register, open to a fresh page. Ruth picked up the pen. She wrote, "Today the room remembered joy without asking permission." Then she looked up. A little boy she had never seen before was standing near the counter, counting coins in his palm with fierce concentration. His mother stood behind him, embarrassed, whispering that maybe they should go somewhere else. Ruth closed the notebook, walked over, bent slightly so she could meet the boy's eyes. "What are you hungry for, baby?" His mother started to explain. Ruth gently raised one hand. Not to silence her, to spare her. The boy looked toward the kitchen. "Chicken," he said. Ruth smiled. "Then chicken it is," the mother's eyes filled. "I can pay something. I know you can." Ruth touched the edge of the counter. "But this is a table first." Across the room, Caleb watched her. He would remember that moment years later. Not because LeBron James had once visited their restaurant, not because the internet had briefly cared, but because his grandmother had learned something from being seen and then turned around and gave it away. That is how respect travels when it is real. Not loudly, not perfectly, not always with cameras or applause. It moves from one tired person to another, from one open door to another, from one table where someone finally sits down and feels human again. And long after the rain had dried from that first night, long after the check had been cashed, and the sign had been fixed, and the world had moved on to louder stories, Ruth Calloway still opened Marion's Table every morning at 6 o'clock. She still touched Samuel's cap before unlocking the door. She still called everybody baby. She still wrote in the black notebook when the room gave her something worth keeping. And sometimes, when customers asked about the framed note near the register, Ruth would smile softly and say, "A man came in once who reminded me that people should be respected before they have to prove they're struggling." Then she would turn back toward the kitchen. Because the gravy needed stirring. Because the cornbread was almost ready. Because somebody hungry was about to walk through the door. And because every table, if cared for properly, can become a place where the world remembers how to be kind.